Good afternoon, everyone. I'm going to be talking for a couple minutes here with Benjamin Shields from the Right Media YouTube channel. We're going to discuss the distractions going on in the mainstream media that are going to try to explain away all these food price rises. So we wanted today to start with the soybean fiasco in China because if there's a trade war and it's centered around soybeans, if your food price goes up, you'll say, well, that's just to be expected. There's a trade war with soybeans. And you're going to start to see this repeatedly across the planet again and again and again as the media tries to give you an excuse so you don't even question what's going on. You'll say, yeah, that makes sense. Just things are going up because of X, Y, or Z factor. You just expect that. And from time to time, he and I are also going to dissect the media and overlay the grand solar minimum with what you're seeing in the daily news headlines. And during our conversation, I'm just going to leave you with some tranquil videos so you can focus on our words. Hope you get something out of our conversation.
Hey David, it's great to have you here. I know you want to talk about the soybeans in China, so if you want to just take it away, fill me in on whatever you got there.
Well, I wanted to dovetail it into all the media distractions that you're focusing on as well with the channel that you're doing. You see the political end of it. I see the more agricultural end of it. But you have to realize that when you start to look back in history, and there's a lot of peer-reviewed research, when we come into just the 11-year solar cycle, the monsoon changes its flow from either more north or more south, generally 2 to 3 degrees north latitude, different at 2 to 3 to 5 degrees latitude difference in the northern hemisphere. When we come into a grand scale, this is going to be thrown completely off, and what it's going to do is reduce the moisture pattern going up to China. They're absolutely going into a mega drought, and I think that part of this trade tariff on the soybeans and Trump and everything that's happening with this is a distraction. So when the food prices start to rise, they have an excuse for it.
Yeah. Something that I saw that was really interesting was the increase in the soybean prices and the amount that China's looking to import now. They're looking to increase their imports of soybeans by like 5%. And they say that it's because of they're trying to feed it to the pigs more, and there's an increase in the pork industry. And I was just that kind of caught my eye as being really off, because you think that if China's producing less and you have this cold front going through northern Asia that's kind of wiping out a lot of these soybean fields and delaying the growing season by a lot, you'd think that they would try to find some other food other than soybeans, but they're not. And I'm almost wondering if they're not going to be blindsided by it, or if this is all tying into the soybean issue that we're seeing.
It's my own personal opinion that I feel it is a smoke and mirror campaign as you start to see domino after domino falling to distract us in the media to explain away what's happening. Think about it. If the just-in-time distribution system has a problem credit-wise, if something's not delivered in your store, well, that makes sense. Now, what if the oil prices are rising, which for me doesn't make sense? We're supposed to have 400 years worth of oil in the United States alone, yet oil's at 3-year highs at $65 a barrel today.
Yeah.
How is this? These prices should be incredibly reduced, but it's almost going back to like 2008 again, where everything is going up in price and there'll be natural pull and push and credit disruptions, which would be another explanation of why the food's getting more expensive.
Yeah. I mean, I saw that yesterday, that Trump's tweet alone about striking Syria increased. It was like a 2% surge in oil prices. And it made me almost think about, maybe an ulterior motive for that tweet, because I don't think we've seen a strike on Syria from the U.S. yet. So, I mean, it very well could be some kind of plan, or it could just be, I mean, he is the president. He could just have the power to change the stock market with a tweet. But the other thing that I picked up on that was really interesting with everything going on over in China was the fact that I did a video a few days ago on them moving into Venezuela and taking over a lot of the oil industry in Venezuela. And doing a bit more research, I found that Venezuela actually has like prime farmlands for growing. And one of the things that the Chinese government's trying to do is push people to other areas of the world where they can farm and be more productive than they would be in China.
Yeah, you'll start there to see that. Also, you mentioned the soybean prices were up, but I'm working on a video now trying to describe exactly what all these different parameters are, which we're talking about. But going through the futures prices, everything is up. I mean, everything. Even fish feed is up. So I don't care if you're looking at barley prices, wheat prices, corn prices, which makes no sense, but it's supposedly all-time record corn planting, which they're not going to get it in the ground. It's a fallacy that things are on time. I've been through AgWeb for the last 24 hours, digging through everything in Index Mundi, looking around. All prices are up. Everything's delayed in planting, and all these rosy forecasts for the food production for the year are absolutely that, just rosy predictions that are not going to pan out. Like the first food price rises from the grand solar minimum are going to be felt this year, and they're going to need to make excuses to explain it.
Yeah, they definitely will. And I think that there's something to be said about, China trying to expand their farmland territory, because I mean, especially like in the US, I know China's been buying up a lot of the industries here, and we're seeing, and I don't know if this is tied into China directly, but you're talking about corn production going up or supposedly going up. And I know another issue with that is that even if there's an increase in corn production, like even if that is true, there's more going to like ethanol and alternative, or not even alternative energies, but just ethanol. And there's farmers being subsidized for this, and so tax dollars are going to this alternative energy that you get less energy out than you put in, but they're trying to prop it up with tax dollars, and you're taking farmers who are growing corn for food, and now they're growing it for ethanol.
Let's touch on another area in the world where China is in heavily. They are in North Africa. And if you start to look back at the climatic cycles, Africa and the Sahel starts to get wetter. It becomes grassland. There's even lakes that form during there on some of these longer, more powerful cycles. And this is really what's making me think. It doesn't normally happen on a 400-year cycle where, the Sahel will instantly bloom for, a couple decades, and then it'll go back dry again. These are on multi-millennia cycles where the moisture will start coming back into northern Africa again. I mean, the Chinese have spent billions putting rail lines out in the middle of the desert. I actually did a full video talking about the investment, where these areas of rails extend into Chad and different places like this. They didn't go over to Mauritania clear west, but it was, places like Chad and Sudan and everywhere to the east coast of Africa. So when I did a video, it was called China's String of Pearls, and it explains how if they're going to lose food production in China, they're going to have to make up for it elsewhere, but they're going to need a protection route delivering that food from Africa back to China through Jiapu Port over in western Myanmar that then connects into Kunming, and then they can hit the rail lines there instead of going through the Malacca Straits and all the way to Singapore, or past Singapore and up to Shanghai. Did a whole video about this, about 15 minutes explanation of these string of pearls. And now the very last one, of acquaintance of mine, wrote me and said, hey, they just paid billions to take over another island chain in the Indian Ocean. So it seems like their string of pearls is now complete. So the protection to get that food from Africa back to China is underway.
Wow. Yeah, I was reading about some of the trade routes that China's trying to make, and I mean, it sounds like, they've got them pretty well completed now, but I was reading about 65 different trade routes they're trying to make between Asia and Europe. And a lot of that was more for oil, it said, but I have a feeling, I mean, there's got to be some other stuff that they're trying to move through the trade routes there. And if we're seeing this cold front move through northern Asia, then I'd imagine it has to be food also.
Yeah, and you think about the main line, what about all the spur lines that could come off, and the main trade route coming away? What if we put a spur line and we put up agricultural enhancements, if you will, like up in Tajikistan, Kyrgyzstan, Kazakhstan, and other areas that aren't widely farmed now, but with a little impetus could be turned into farmlands? That's where a lot of the investment, I think, is going to go this direction too. But if you can set up the main trunk line, if you will, first, then you could set off all these feeder lines. It's kind of where we're going with this. The global food production scheme is going to change, and where we grow now will shift. But imagine if you already know in advance where the shift will move to, then you could already be positioning everything to take advantage of just setting up new grow zones. And hey, guess what? There's already a ready available trade route and facilitate or a facility and a way to facilitate movement around supply chain and logistics built right in. Isn't that convenient?
Yeah, yeah. I think it's definitely something that the Chinese are moving more towards, and I think there's probably a lot of other countries moving towards it if they can. I think it's just a matter of, really digging into it like you have. You have the ports nailed down, you have the island chains and everything, and you got it all figured out. And I bet that, there are many other countries, like Russia, I know has an interest in Venezuela as well. And, it makes you wonder, and they also have an interest in Kazakhstan and a lot of those other surrounding areas around them. And it makes you wonder if when the frost line moves south, if you have areas that are now able to become like agricultural hubs that weren't so much before in that Middle Eastern region, like you were talking about Kazakhstan. And I mean, you could really take this beyond just like China and soybeans and talk about, you have big nations that are trying to accommodate for this eventual food loss. And I mean, if they know what's coming, I wouldn't doubt that they're trying to open trade routes and get food in from, or import food basically.
But another facet, that's all just great and fine and dandy of them creating their own food sources out of nothing. But the whole thing is they're going to have to distract everybody while the food prices increase without explaining that we're going into a grand solar minimum. So all these things on the political end, Ben, that you're talking about, you're analyzing, you're seeing, they all feed into this somehow. And this is why we're trying to have this weekly discussion about a single issue every time.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, there's definitely a lot that's going on in the media that's pretty big right now. I mean, between the testimony of Zuckerberg, and you have these riots going on in Venezuela and what's going on in South Africa that we talked about a bit last time. I mean, it all ties together, and I think that we're probably going to end up seeing a lot more of the ramifications, specifically from China, in the very near future. I mean, we're seeing, trade routes and them buying up Venezuelan oil industries and whatnot now, but I think it's definitely going to expand more rapidly as times become a bit more desperate. And I think, like you said last time, you were mentioning that we're going to see this ramp up in the media of stories to just try to cover everything else that's going on, because everything else that they're trying to cover is going to get to a point where they almost can't just cover it up anymore, but they're going to keep trying. So it's going to escalate to more and more outrageous media stories. And I don't doubt that it's going to get there very soon. And I almost think we're seeing the tip of it now, where, and maybe we have been for the last year or so. I mean, there's so much in the news now that's just nonsensical garbage, and it really makes me wonder what the point of it is. But I mean, when you talk about rising food prices and frost lines moving south, and you have the Chinese soybean fiasco and what's going on in Venezuela, it makes you wonder what they're really trying to cover up. And I don't doubt that it's something that ties into the grand solar minimum.
Some to become more Hollywood-esque as we move forward, and the first real losses of the crops won't come until the harvest season of 2019. So what we're at is right now the delayed plantings, reduction in just total overall yields. I know some countries are having a little bit more crop, but there's so many more losses happening that are chipping away at the gains. So as this continues on its momentum forward, just keep your eyes out in the media and see what stories are out there that make no sense that could somehow tie into this as a distraction point. And I'll leave you on one last thought here as we close out today. The Zuckerberg thing, I think what they're trying to do is pivot this into break up Facebook, and then during this time we won't be able to communicate as easily as we can now, because same with China, they have these draconian new laws that were in place just in these last 3 months, where the entire social media is now regulated, where you can't say anything and anything about anything without going to jail, basically. So if we come down to this and you can't even communicate about the crop losses or what's happening or where it's all these things that we're talking about, if you can't even communicate that because now Facebook's broken up and there's all these regulatory laws and statutes in place, and they're trying to limit the size of companies for the connectivity. Because you take a look at the monopoly of Facebook, how many people they connect at the moment, regardless of the harvesting of your data, that aside, but just the sheer volume of people they connect. Now, if you can break that and shatter that into 100 small pieces, the connectivity of you sharing this type of information is going to be much, much, much more difficult.
Oh yeah, I mean, I listened to the testimony of Mark Zuckerberg day one and two, and there was some really heavy pushes for some kind of big brother over Facebook, and I wouldn't doubt that they're trying to break it up, like you said, and have like government regulation over it, so then they can suffocate it and really put people in a worse spot when, you know, crap hits the fan.
Be vigilant is all I can say. It's your responsibility as a listener to look into these stories and find out your own information. I don't want you to just take my word for it and I'm talking this, that, and the other. You need to do your own research, and that is the point. I'm bringing up the idea. I want you to go out there and dig and do your own research. You know, those of you listening, try to refute what I say. Try to refute what Ben says about it as well. And I want you to do your own digging and really, maybe you're going to come up with your own unique conclusion. I would love to hear it if you can share with us.
Yeah, that would be awesome. So thanks for coming on, Dave. I really appreciate it, getting your input on this. So yeah, I can't wait to talk to you again.
We'll get together next week for sure and bring you another episode of, I don't even know what you call this, mind melding of the grand solar minimum,
Yeah.
and the media claptrap or something.